afternoon with blue hazes scarfing the harvest slopes, little winds whispering elfishly in the poplars, and dancing splendor of red poppies outflaming against the dark coppice of young firs in a corner of the cherry orchard, was fitter for dreams than dead languages. Ah! Hello, my beautiful friends. Today is the 7th of November, and today is a wonderful day for very many reasons. I am going to be sitting down and updating you all on the books that I have read recently. I haven't done a wrap-up video or like a recently read book video in a very long time. So it's not that I wasn't reading. If you want to check out my previous video, which is kind of a life update video, an update on like my mental health and the way things have been going thus far the last couple months, that'll definitely give you some insight on why I haven't been posting videos. But luckily I have still continued to read because it has been something that's really been super comforting, and I talked about this in my update video, but reading is really nurturing to my inner child, and it just really makes me happy. As usual, I read all of my books on my Libby app on my tablet. Also, look at all my plants behind me. Ain't they cute? I'm kind of sad though that they all like fit in this area, because that's just not enough. All of these opinions are my own personal opinion, not trying to offend anyone or hurt anybody's feelings. If you do like any of the books that I personally didn't enjoy, everybody's different, everybody likes different things, and that's what makes us all beautiful. First book is gonna be Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I'm just gonna read briefly the synopsis on Goodreads, and I'll let you know my rating, and then I will tell you a little about what I think about it. So, Get a Life, Chloe Brown is the first book in the Brown Sisters series by Talia Hibbert. Chloe Brown is a chronically ill computer geek with a goal, a plan, and a list. After almost but not quite dying, she's come up with 7 directives to help her get a life. So basically, Chloe has this list that she wants to accomplish in order to get a life. And I really related to that aspect of her because for one, the representation was so importantly valuable to me personally because I have dealt with having chronic pain. I have IBS, and I have gone through a lot of my life being in pain and going to very many doctors who didn't know what the fuck was going on with me. I definitely related to that aspect of her experience and her story, and that experience in and of itself can be extremely isolating, especially if you're the type of person who kind of is an introvert in general. Being in a situation that makes you more isolated or makes you feel more isolated just kind of like further increases that feeling. So I felt a lot of similarities to what she would be talking about in regards to like her chronic illness. Once you get down to the nitty-gritty of the story, it is a kind of hate to love romantic story. It was a really quick read. I think I read it in like one day, and I enjoyed every second of it. One thing that I can say, and that I think I saw someone else either say in a review on Goodreads or on YouTube or something, was that I did have a slight, like, it wasn't a problem, but it was just like a slight reaction to when they would shift from the way that she was speaking when she was like on her own or she was thinking about someone else or whatever, to the more steamy scenes. And let's be real, I think out of all the books that I've read recently, that book has had the best steamy scenes that I've read in a while. And if you read it, you know what type of hoe I am. Anyway, that being said though, I did very much enjoy it, but there definitely was a contrast to those types of scenes. And I think if you're not ready for it, you're not gonna be ready for it. So just letting you know, it happens, it's real, I enjoyed it, I'm here for it. There were definitely some topics that I would have loved to delve a little bit more deeply into. That's just me personally, but overall I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely read it again. I am a pervert. So the next book that I read was the first book in the Folk of Air series by Holly Black. It's interesting because I actually read either a Holly Black series or a Holly Black book when I was younger, and I loved it because it gave a different perspective on like the fairy world. It's a little bit of a darker insight into the fairy world, and I absolutely loved that. So this definitely is along the same lines. So basically this is about 3 sisters. They were taken away essentially from the human world by the older sister's father after he brutally murders their parents. And so the older sister is fairy as well, and you have the 2 other daughters who are human, and so basically, and they're twins. So basically this story follows Jude, which is one of the human twins, who is very angsty. She's a very angsty, like riled up little ball of energy. I really like the way that Holly Black approaches fairy stories, because it's not in the way that you may necessarily think that this would come about. There's a lot more darkness and there's a lot more depth. I have read maybe in other novels that kind of have the same subject line. I feel like Jude was kind of a character that she is basically a person who just feels a lot of anger and essentially wants to channel that anger into something somewhat productive, and she is essentially bullied by this cruel prince, and it's absolutely terrible. It's horrendous. It's so interesting when I read things now because I'm reading it from not only the perspective of the character and like as if I were in their shoes, but I'm also reading it from the perspective of being a parent as well. And so I'm just sitting there fucking appalled, wanting to beat somebody's ass, because I'm like, these motherfuckers, no, this is unacceptable. Also, one thing that I wasn't crazy about, but I feel like it added an interesting dynamic, which continued on into the next book of the series, which I read, but I'll talk about that a little bit, was the dynamic of her relationship with her twin sister. Overall, I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. I think purely for the aspect of like the sister relationship, because I just really didn't enjoy that piece of it, but that book was really good. It kept me on my toes. It's one of those series that just was super exciting all the way through, and there really weren't any slow moments in it, and it was just a really easy, fun read, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. All right, so the next book is The Poppy War. It's kind of like a cult classic right now, I feel like, and so it's definitely something that I felt like I needed to read. I had actually DNF'd this a couple months ago, I think, and I had just been so daunted by the idea of reading it because it's a thick one. It's a big one, and I read it on my tablet, so how would I know that it's thick? But it was really long, and it just, that's what she said. I'm sorry, I couldn't let it go. I couldn't. Anyway, I was just kind of nervous about reading it because I wasn't sure about getting into a new series, learning about a new world and all that nonsense, and I was just intimidated. And I had actually kind of started it previously. I read a couple pages and it was a little bit slow in the beginning. It took a little while for me to get into it. So basically, let me read a little bit of the synopsis. When Rin aced the Keiju, it was a shock to everyone. To test the officials who couldn't believe a war orphan from Rooster Province could pass without cheating. To Rin's guardians, who believed they'd finally be able to marry her off and further their criminal enterprise. And to Rin herself, who realized she was finally free of servitude and despair that had made up her daily existence. That she got into Sinigard, the most elite military school in Nakan, was even more surprising. I really loved it because there was so much that was put in to the book. It felt like I was reading multiple books at once. It was just from the perspective of Rin, and it was about her whole experience of being at the school and being really treated like shit by pretty much most of the people who go to that school, just because of the fact that she lived in poverty, because of her skin color, because of just stupid reasons, honestly. And I loved the journey that it took you on and the depth that went into every piece of the journey. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The only thing that I can really say negatively about it was that I was a little bit bored by some of like the war tactic scenes, like the war planning. That's just me personally. So I really enjoyed every other aspect, and that was honestly not an overwhelming amount of the book itself. One of the things that sticks out to me is the part when she basically has to meditate for like an extended period of time. She doesn't even know how long she needs to meditate or she is going to meditate, and man, it just really made me want to meditate, which I'm not the greatest at meditating. I'm working on it. I'm getting better, but it's not my favorite thing to do in the world. So just watching that and the way that the author painted that picture was just absolutely beautiful. There's so much depth, not an overwhelming amount of information, but enough to build the world and enough to give me like a full picture with still allowing me the freedom to like put things together myself, if that makes sense. Okay, so the next book is Anne of Green Gables. I think I actually had this on my bookshelf. I spilled water on it in the car, and so I was very disappointed. This is why we can't have nice things here. So I ended up reading it on my tablet, and I really like the cover. I'm gonna try to put it up somewhere on the screen because I really like these covers for the Anne of Green Gables books. It was a fun read. It was a nice little break in between the heavier books that I was reading, literally and figuratively heavier books that I was reading. It's just a story about a girl named Anne who is an orphan, and she goes to live with these humans. And it just goes into all of the shenanigans that she gets into, all of the scrapes that she gets into. And it's just really fun and cute and such a like heartwarming story, and I feel like it's perfect for autumn fall time because there's so much beautiful lyrical writing about the autumn. Warms my heart, makes me happy, can't wait for Luna to read it. And another reason why I wanted to read it as well is because I think earlier this year we finished the Anne with an E series on Netflix. Absolutely loved it, highly suggest it, but it's very different from Anne with an E, or it's very different from Anne of Green Gables. So I really want to watch, they have, I think the full like series or movies or something of Anne of Green Gables on Amazon Prime, so I'm gonna watch those. But Anne with an E was so good. I was devastated when I heard that it was canceled. And it was just starting to get good. Why do they always cancel the things I love? The OA. I don't even want to talk about that. I really can't talk about that because that was yeah. I almost canceled Netflix because of that shit. The next book that I read is I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Reid. I definitely started reading like thriller, more scary, psychological type books in the month of October. I was trying to get myself out of my comfort zone a little bit because that's not usually a genre that I read. And I read a ton of books in that genre, and I'm very proud of myself. I was fucking terrified during a lot of it, but I also really enjoyed it, and now I kind of like want to read more. And I'm slightly scared for myself because I'm like, who am I turning into? But I still can't watch scary movies, so still me. I'm Thinking of Ending Things is basically about our main character. It's basically about her going to visit the family of her boyfriend, Jake. And in the beginning of the novel, she's in the car. They're kind of like having conversations the whole time and talking about different things, different topics. And then they have the scenes where they go to his parents and everything's kind of weird. Not kind of weird. Everything's really fucking weird. Everything's just off. There was an aspect of not only the relationship that she was having with her boyfriend, the weirdness at his family's house. There was also this like mysterious caller that she felt like was a stalker who was stalking her pretty much like her whole life. And so that was this kind of looming aspect throughout the whole book that like just made you feel like you were being watched and it made me feel really uncomfortable, and I didn't like it, but I also did like it, but I didn't like it mostly. I kept trying to predict what was going to happen, and I've read so many reviews. I watched so many video essays on this freaking book, and also the movie as well, because it is a movie on Netflix, which I'm not going to watch because I watched pretty much every video about it, and so I know what's gonna happen. And I wasn't able to figure out what was going to happen at the end. Once everything kind of unfolded and you figured out what was going on by the end, I was just really underwhelmed. Like extremely underwhelmed. And honestly a little annoyed. I liked certain parts of it, but I just felt like a lot of it, especially the conversations that they would have in the car and stuff, you see this like in the movie trailer, and I think you know about it like in the synopsis or whatever, so I don't think it's a spoiler, but the conversations that they're having just feel really pretentious at times. And so I think this is probably my lowest rated book on Goodreads. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I had it at 3, I think, and then I lowered it down to 2 because I was like, I really didn't like it. The next book that I read was The Wicked King, which is the second book in the Folk of Air series. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. Again, I love this series. I love following along with the journey of Jude and what is going on in her life. And this basically puts us, I'm trying not to give spoilers because I feel like it'll kind of give spoilers to the end of the first book if I tell you where they're at. So basically at the beginning of this book, there has been a huge shift in the power dynamic of what was going on in the first book. It's very different, like it feels very different from the first book, and it feels really good. Like it felt really good to me to be able to feel like someone who didn't have as much power in the beginning was finally getting to a position where they could have power to, you know, accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish. And like essentially her relationship, a continuation of her relationship, her dysfunctional relationship with this cruel prince. Yeah, also her relationship with herself and her sister and getting to know herself better. And I'm really excited to read the next one because I'm really looking forward to seeing how it is going to be wrapped up because I know it's going to be something really fucking unexpected. Also, one thing that I want to say about this world is that the fairies are so brutal, like unnecessarily brutal. I also really love seeing how Jude grapples with being a human in this world that is inherently just like despicably not human, like anti-human, and it's just really interesting to see how she deals with that and how she kind of makes a place for herself in this world. And yeah, I'm excited to see where the next one leads because that ending was like, oh, what? And I'm getting excited thinking about it. So I think after the book that I'm reading right now, I'm gonna read it. That book is A Discovery of Witches. Please don't burn me at the stake. I just personally really didn't like it. You know, I had this feeling for some reason when I was going to start it. I was like, I don't really want to read this. I feel like this isn't going to be great. But when I read the synopsis and I heard other people talking about it, they made it sound so good. They made it sound very like dark academic, and maybe I'm just not dark academia enough. I did like the fact that it was like a witch and kind of about a vampire. I did like certain aspects of learning about their histories, and they went really in depth about not only science in general, and I feel like the way that they balanced the human world and the kind of like witches world, vampire world or whatever. I thought that was a really interesting to read about, and like the way that there was history for each of those kind of species. I thought that was really interesting and was really intriguing to read about. When I first started, I was actually really hopeful because I felt like I liked the main character. I liked what was going on. She basically goes into a library. She's like a professor or something like that. And she goes into a library and she comes across this book that is has a spell on it. to not be open, but she manages to open it somehow, and then she sends it away and isn't able to get it again, and everything that transpires afterwards is because of this book. And so you learn about what the book exactly is, you learn about her history and why she has made certain decisions to be where she is at that current time. It's from the perspective of the female main character and also the male main character, who is the vampire. And to be perfectly honest, it was very quickly that I wanted to read more of his perspective than I wanted to read hers. I wrote a couple notes on my phone. I really hope, I might be offending some people because I feel like a lot of people really like this, and it's a series on Amazon, I think, but I was not crazy about it. So I wasn't expecting for there to be so much of a romantic aspect. That's totally fine. I love romance. I love, you know, a good steamy scene and stuff. But I just felt like it turned into something that I wasn't expecting for it to turn into, and it was something that I didn't enjoy. There were too many goddamn descriptions of them drinking wine. Point blank, period. Like, we needed maybe half of those. I don't drink wine, I don't drink alcohol, so maybe I'm just not that type. Maybe there will be other people that would be interested in that, but I just was not at all, and I felt like it was unnecessary to keep going back to that thing. I also put that there is a problematic cliche vampire relationship, and I definitely did feel that. I felt like there was this weird, uncomfortable, gross power dynamic thing, which, like, I could understand how it unfolded. And I thought starting out that she was gonna be like this strong lead character, and maybe it changes throughout the books, but I don't know, I just wasn't feeling like that was being reinforced, or that was the narrative that was being told in this book. There were definitely certain aspects of, like, things he would say or certain things that we do that I felt just were really problematic, and that I feel like were kind of, I don't know, justified and romanticized, and I just wasn't a fan. The main character, to me, it felt like she just turned into a child. And like I said, that made me really uncomfortable. I am a very assertive person who, like, I'll share my opinion and stuff, but like me, like my overall being, I'm not a dominant person, I'm a submissive person. And so I understand that, and I don't dislike that in books normally. But the way that it went about it, I don't know, it just made me really uncomfortable. I didn't really start getting into it until like 30% left of the book. And then I was like, oh shit, now I actually care what's going on. And I'm probably gonna read the next one because they kind of left it at a place where it was a cliffhanger, and so now I feel like I have to read it. Also, I highlighted in the book, because I've been highlighting certain parts of the book, one of the quotes was about a cat that is in the book named Tabitha, and I literally thought that Tabitha was the best character in this entire novel. Can we have more of that, please? Then I have next the one book that I bought, which was When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. Whew! This shook me to my core because, like everybody says in the review videos, it felt like something that could happen, will happen, is happening. Like, I'm like, where did you get this from? Where did you get this from? Because it feels real and I'm scared. It is following the main character whose name is Sydney Green, and in her neighborhood there is essentially gentrification happening. And this whole story basically gets into that topic in a way that is like really triggering because it's real, and also extremely triggering because there are certain aspects of the way that she approaches certain things, and they just, I don't know, everything feels like it's something that could actually happen, and it made me so uncomfortable, but I absolutely fucking loved it. I don't know, the male perspective was it like a dual perspective? I think it was of two people's perspectives. in the story, just more focused specifically on Sydney, and the male was a white male, and I heard some people saying that that kind of rubbed them the wrong way. Yeah, I totally understand what they're saying about that, and I definitely felt that to a certain extent, but I was just so, I read it in less than 24 hours. It was so good and so terrifying. I was literally sitting on the couch just like sirens. I was shook. I was shook by the things happening in this book because it was just crazy, and I can't really tell you anything that goes on because just everything, like, you think you know what's going to happen, but you don't, and it goes somewhere that's like, I wasn't expecting it to go to this place, and like some parts of it feel kind of like, is this like, okay, now this kind of feels a little bit like unreal, but then it also doesn't at the same time. It brings up a lot of different subjects that need to be talked about, and man, those white neighbors were the worst. Like, honestly, I was looking out my window being like, it made me paranoid. This is why I don't read thrillers. All right, so the next book is Gone Girl, which is by Gillian Flynn. This is a book that definitely has a cult following. I had heard so much about it for years, I guess, when it first came out, and I was really resistant to reading it because I was like, everybody's obsessed with it, and that makes me not want to read it because I was totally that person. And also, I just didn't really read thrillers and stuff like that, so I decided to go and read it because October wanted to read some psychological thrillers. So the premise of the story is that there is a husband and wife. It is their 5th anniversary, and the wife goes missing. It's told in dual perspectives, so there's chapters where it is the wife sharing her journal entries of how they kind of got to that place. And then it's also the husband and his current experience of what's going on. And I hated both of them, to be perfectly honest. I definitely disliked the husband a lot more because I just felt like he was a gross piece of shit. It was an interesting book. What did I rate this? 4 out of 5 stars. So I did enjoy it. It definitely kept me on the edge of my seat. That plot twist right smack dab in the middle just hit me like a ton of bricks, and I was like, the fuck? And then everything that kind of happened afterwards was 2 books left. So the next book is the second book in the Anne of Green Gables series, and that is Anne of Avonlea, and basically this follows her into her young adult teen years, and she is working at a school and still, you know, getting into her little shenanigans, but she's a little bit older, so her shenanigans have calmed down a little bit. And I just love Anne as a character. Like, she's someone that I just really love her as a character. I think I relate to her a lot as like a kindred spirit because, you know, I was always imagining things and making up stories and yeah. And I very much appreciate that aspect was still in the second book as well, even though she is getting older. It was definitely a lot less than the first one, but it was still definitely in there, and it was definitely a focus and something that I feel like was important. And yeah, I very much enjoyed it. Last book that I read was Transcendent Kingdom. I'm not going to pronounce the author's name because I know that I will butcher it because I'm terrible at pronouncing names. Absolutely the worst. But this is by the same author that wrote Homegoing, which was one of my favorite books that I read this year, and I gave that book 5 out of 5 stars. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. I have 33 highlights, if that says anything. Gifty is a 5th-year candidate in neuroscience at Stanford School of Medicine, studying reward-seeking behavior in mice and the neural circuits of depression and addiction. Her brother Nana was gifted a gifted high school athlete who died of a heroin overdose after a knee injury left him hooked on Oxycontin. Her suicidal mother is living in her bed. Gifty is determined to discover the scientific basis for the suffering she sees all around her. But even as she turns to the hard science to unlock the mystery of her family's loss, she finds herself hungering for her childish faith and grappling with the evangelical church in which she was raised, which promise of salvation remains as tantalizing as it is elusive. Basically, it follows her throughout her life and her experience of being in the church and learning certain things about it, and the way that the church sees her, and just kind of like understanding the way that it interacts with her and the way that she interacts with it. And it's a really beautiful kind of reflection and study of, for me, what I got from it was like really thinking about the balance between knowing that spirituality, religion, these things, these feelings we get from these certain specific places don't have to necessarily don't necessarily have to cancel out other things that we believe in. That's definitely something that I have dealt with over the past couple years, because I grew up in the church. I grew up in a Christian household, and I definitely was feeling a lot of parallels from what she was experiencing, and things that she felt. The truth is, we don't know what we don't know. We don't even know the questions we need to ask in order to find out. And when we learn one tiny thing, a dim light comes on in a dark hallway, and suddenly a new question appears. We spend decades, centuries, millennia trying to answer that one question so that another dim light will come on. I feel that so much. Like, no matter what you learn about yourself or the world or your existence, there's always going to be questions. And I think getting comfortable with not knowing is the gift that this life truly gives you, because so many people claim to have the answers, claim to know the truth. But what is truth? Truth is such an objective thing that is only based on your reality and your perspective, that you can't say that there is one specific truth. Just because you believe one thing doesn't mean that what someone else believes is wrong. Okay, so the aspects of like her talking about being in the church and stuff really hit home for me, because man, it just really reflected so much of my experience of being in the church. This one is, he was the kind of youth pastor who wanted to make God hip in a way that almost felt exclusionary. And that is so true. I have dealt with so many youth pastors who like want to be cool and hip, and like, if you're not that same way or you don't do things the way that they want you to do them, then you're cut out of the clique. And man, I have been cut out of the clique. So I think I'm gonna read this last one. I grew up around people who were distrustful of science, who thought of it as a cunning trick to rob them of their faith, and I've been educated around scientists and lay people alike who talk about religion as though it were a comfort blanket for the dumb and the weak, a way to extol the virtues of a God more improbable than our own human existence. But this tension, this idea that one must necessarily choose between science and religion, is false. Ooh, I'm just gonna leave it at that. That's what I came away from this book with. It gave me so much more clarity and also more questions, because that's just what happens in life in general. But I absolutely love this book. I love the way this author writes. I cannot wait to read more by them, because Homegoing was so beautiful. This book was so beautiful and heart-wrenching and life-shattering and life-changing, and I just absolutely loved it. That is it for all of the books that I read over the past few months that I've read recently. I'm currently reading the 5th season, which I am loving so far, and I am excited to get back into consistently letting you guys know about books. Let me know if you guys have read any of these books down below and what you thought about them. Also, let me know any other books that you would suggest that I check out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys have a beautiful rest of your day, and I hope you are able to find joy in whatever way that you can. We have a woman, person of color, as the vice president. I'm happy. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Love you. Bye.